Hello everyone. My name's Janine and I'm a food scientist working as postdoctoral researcher in the consumer behavior group at ETH Zurich in Switzerland. It's a great pleasure for me to present you today our cross-cultural research on food disgust sensitivity. This research was part of my dissertation project on food disgust. In the study I present to you today, we investigated possible cultural differences in food disgust sensitivity between Switzerland and China. So let's start with the question what food disgust sensitivity is and why we should look into it. So what is food disgust sensitivity? Food disgust sensitivity is a protective mechanism. It protects us from the intake of potentially poisonous or dangerous foods. Previous research reported that food disgust sensitivity is also a predictor for the willingness to consume novel foods. Individuals that have a high food disgust sensitivity tend to be more reluctant to try novel foods than individuals with lower disgust sensitivity. In a study conducted by our group, we also found that high food disgust sensitivity can lead to a diet with little variation, possibly because too many foods are considered as potentially dangerous, which in turn restricts the number of available food choices. And finally, it was consistently reported that food choice, and whether we consider certain foods as acceptable or not, strongly depend on our cultural background. Just think about the example of edible insects, which are consumed in many countries, but not so much in Europe. Now that we know why and how food disgust sensitivity is important, the question arises how we can measure it. Several disgust scales have been developed over the years. Most of them contain several disgust domains, such as hygiene or moral disgust. Hartmann and Sigris developed the food disgust scale, which was the first disgust scale that specifically focused on the domain of food. It contains 32 text-based items that participants are asked to rate on a scale from 1 to 6. 1 would mean not disgusting at all, and 6 would be extremely disgusting. Another food-specific measure of disgust sensitivity is the food disgust picture scale. Instead of text items, it contains 8 pictures of various food items that participants are asked to rate on a scale from 0 to 100. Again, 0 would be not disgusting at all, and 100 would be extremely disgusting. Now let's have a look at the food disgust picture scale. In this slide you can see the 8 pictures that are used in the scale. It covers various food items such as vegetables, sweets, meat, or fruit. For instance, we have an old tomato, minced meat, a moldy potato, maize salad with insect contamination, or chocolate with fat bloom. So the pictures also cover various disgust elicitors to provide a broad overview on various disgust cues. The questionnaire is usually provided to participants in the form of an online survey. The instructions are given on top. In the middle there's the picture that participants are asked to rate, and on the bottom they have an interactive slider that helps them provide their answer. Participants are instructed to closely look at the picture and to imagine that they were asked to consume the depicted food item. They are asked to indicate how disgusting they perceive this item to be. Furthermore, we inform them that they should answer intuitively and that there are no right or wrong answers. So how did we investigate the cross-cultural differences? We tested a Swiss and a Chinese sample. Both were recruited using local panel providers. In Switzerland, we tested 538 participants, 50% of which were female. Participants' mean age was 45 years. We controlled for sex and age to make sure we obtained a representative sample. In China, we tested 576 participants. Around 51% were female and participants' mean age was 44 years. Again, we controlled for sex and age when recruiting our sample. Now let's have a look at the results. Here you can see the 5 pictures of the food disgust picture scale that received the highest disgust ratings. We notice that both the mean values and the ranking is quite similar between the two countries for these pictures. Insect contamination and mold are disgust cues that are quite strong and lead to high disgust ratings, so these items appear on top. The samples from the two countries differed significantly in their disgust assessment for the cantaloupe and the avocado. For the other 3 items shown here, no significant differences between the countries were found. Moving on to the remaining 3 pictures, we see that here the two countries varied significantly in their mean disgust ratings provided. The differences seem especially pronounced for the meat items. For instance, in Switzerland, both meat items are on average rated as not really disgusting, with average scores of around 40 and 50. In China, however, the chicken was rated as not disgusting, with a score of around 30, but the minced meat was quite disgusting, with a disgust score of around 60. This supports the notion that disgust sensitivity is not only highly product-specific, but strongly depends on the cultural background as well. In the next step, we conducted a confirmatory factor analysis to see whether the factor structure of the food disgust picture scale is comparable between the two countries. On the left, you can see the results for Switzerland, and on the right, you can see the results for China. We found very similar factor structures and factor loadings for both countries. However, we realized that the chicken item was problematic, especially in the Chinese sample. The finding is less pronounced in the Swiss sample, but still, the chicken item is the one item with the lowest factor loading. With this, it seemed that the chicken item was problematic. Therefore, we decided to drop this item and went from the 8-item model to a 7-item model. Dropping the chicken item increased the model fit. In the next step, and using the 7-item model, the configural model with both countries tested simultaneously resulted in a good model fit. From that, we concluded configural invariance for the 7-item model. In this figure, we see the measurement model where factor loadings have been constrained to be equal. Values for the Swiss sample are given in bold, and values for the Chinese sample are given in italics. The comparison between the configural and the measurement model yielded a non-significant difference between the two models. Thus, the measurement model can be regarded as invariant across the two countries. Looking at the correlational patterns, we see that the 7-item food disgust picture scale is highly correlated with the text-based food disgust scale in both Switzerland and China. Additionally, we found that the 7-item food disgust picture scale was significantly correlated with the food neophobia scale in both countries as well. The food neophobia scale is a measure of an individual's reluctance to try novel foods, and it's known to be correlated with food disgust sensitivity. These findings indicate that the food disgust picture scale measures the same construct across Switzerland and China. What else did we find? Consistent with the research and disgust available, we found a significant main effect of sex and country on food disgust sensitivity. However, there was no interaction effect between sex and country on food disgust sensitivity. In conclusion, we found that females tended to give higher disgust scores than males, and that Chinese participants provided higher disgust scores than Swiss participants. From this, we summarize that both sex and culture are important predictors for food disgust sensitivity. However, it is important to note that it would be ill-advised to conclude from the higher average disgust scores in China that the Chinese population in general is more disgust sensitive than the Swiss population. Direct comparisons of hedonic scores across cultures should be taken with care because these scores are subject to cultural differences in response style. Differences in average disgust scores could also indicate more unfamiliarity with the food items depicted in the FDPS in one country. For instance, the chicken item received higher average disgust ratings in the Swiss sample as compared to the Chinese sample. This could be the result of the Chinese consumers being more familiar with less processed meat products than Swiss consumers are. Still, since we found consistent correlational patterns across both countries, we can assume that the two scales measure the same construct in both countries. Now I'd like to conclude this talk with a small outlook. A better understanding of food disgust sensitivity can be important to improve our knowledge about the acceptance of novel foods, with high disgust sensitive people being more reluctant to try these novel foods. Furthermore, with the globalization of the food market, it is of crucial importance to understand cultural differences in food choice. Food disgust sensitivity can also be used to improve sustainability, since it has been shown that high disgust sensitive individuals tend to waste more food than people that are less disgust sensitive. With that, I'd like to conclude this talk, and I'm looking forward to answering your questions.